Welcome back to the Passy's World of ICT Access Database Training. In this lesson, we're going to be looking at the business case study for the scenario we're going to be doing our Microsoft Access work for, which is called Passy's Bargain Barn. So we're going to cross now live to Passy in the Bargain Barn, and he's going to explain how the business works. Yeah, I'll just hold up there 1 minute. Hi, I'm Passy, and this here all around me is my bargain barn. Now, how this bargain barn works is that people bring down their items, their used items, to sell them in the barn. Sometimes they even bring down brand new stuff because, I don't know, somebody bought it and they decided they didn't like it. Well, anyway, they can put it for sale here in the barn. Now, what happens is that it can stay in the barn for 30 days for sale. We only keep it for 30 days on the shelves for sale. After that time, we contact the seller and they need to come on down and collect their item and take it away. They got 1 week to do that, 1 week, 7 whole days to come down and collect their unsold items. A lot of people don't collect their items and we have to take them and send them off to charity. So they're given away so that other people can use them. And that's kind of the idea of how the bargain barn works. If something sells, it's 20% to the bargain barn, and then the other 80% of the sale price, we give that to the customer simply by just using phone banking on our phone and transferring them their 80% of the money. At the moment, we use an Excel spreadsheet to do all these calculations, but as you can see in the barn, we got a lot of stuff here now, and the spreadsheet's gotten really big and really hard to use. So we need ourselves a better solution. So people I've been talking to have told me that I need to get myself one of these Microsoft Access databases, and that's what's going to happen. We're going to take the business and we're going to turn it from Excel spreadsheet into Microsoft Access database, and that's going to give us everything we need to run that business smoothly. All right then, so that's enough from Passy, and he's chewing tobacco. All right, so let's get started here. As we heard in the business overview, what's happening there is, people bring their things down, they've got 30 days to sell. If they sell, it's 20% commission to the bargain barn, 80% back to the seller for what the item sold for. If they don't sell within 30 days, they're unsold items, they're contacted, they've got 7 days to collect them. If they're not collected, they get taken down to charity and given away to charity organizations. Now, at the moment, there's an Excel spreadsheet. That's not adequate for the size of the bargain barn. So we're going to be developing an Access database as a business solution for the barn. Now, in converting to Access, there'll be several components that need to be made, and they get made in a certain particular order. And we'll have separate learning modules in the course for doing each of those items. The first thing that needs to be done is a database created and storage tables. So that will be the first task in the first learning lesson. Now with the tables, it's fairly simple for this business. We just need one table where we put all of the stock items and another separate table where we store the customer information. We link the two tables together by a seller ID, and this will all be explained in the actual tables lesson. The tables need to be designed before you start building. Just like when people are building a house, they need a plan of the house with what rooms it's going to have, what functions and amenities. We need the exact same thing for a database. You don't just start building it. All right, so here we have the database design, which is sometimes called the data structure table or data structure design. All right, so we have fields. Now, fields are the items which are in each record here for a seller. So every seller needs to have their own unique ID, which will be 9 length characters altogether, consisting of 6 letters and 3 numerical digits. And the seller ID will be different for each seller. So if 2 people do have the same name, well, then we can tell who's who from their seller ID. Obviously, we need their last name, their first name, contact details like the email address, the phone, And then we need some bank account information for if their item sells and they need to be paid their 80% share of the sale. The stock items table is a bit bigger than the sellers table. We have the item ID code, which is a unique identifier for that item. I mean, two people might bring in a blue colored boy's bike for sale because the kid's outgrown the size of the bike. And so we need to be able to identify those two items uniquely. We have a status to whether it's sold yet or whether it's still available, a condition. So we specified here in the validation column sort of what the values are going to be for those fields. And we're also going to use drop-down lists, which will be covered in a second separate lesson. So a lot of this won't make sense, especially the validation column. That's quite complicated at the moment. Later on, when you've done these modules in the course, this will make a lot more sense. But at this stage, you just need to know what are the fields we're going to be building for each stock item that comes into the barn, what sort of field they need to be, and this will all be done in the tables lesson when we create the database and make some tables for things to go into. The last table will be a buyer's table. Usually when you buy something, you don't have to give your name and your contact details, but it'd be nice if we can try and get that from people when they shop at the bargain barn, because that gives you marketing opportunities from that list. You can target people for sales, for specials, for promotions. Okay, we have some sample data here, so we're not going to enter like all 500 sellers that have been through the bargain barn in the last 2 months, but if we just have a small sample here, we can build the database and test it with that. So we just have some names here and some phone numbers and bank ID cards and bank account numbers. They're not real people's details, obviously. This is just test data that we're going to use for testing the database. We also have some stock items data, so we've got some items here which are for sale currently in the bargain barn. A couple of them there, the first two are actually sold, and we have the seller ID, so we can link up that stock item to who the seller of the item is, so we can work out who gets paid for what when it gets sold. Now, a listing start date, that's important because we need to keep track of that to know when things have been in the barn for more than 30 days. And can then be put in unsold status. And we have an image location field here. We're not going to be using that for a while until we get to the forms lesson, where we're going to have pictures of the stock items on the data entry screen forms. So don't worry about that for now. That's just going to be left blank, but it is something we need to build into the tables when we make the database. And we have some sample buyer data there. Also a little more bio information on Passy. He used to be a dairy cow farmer, but developers came as the city fringe moved out and he sold his farm, was wondering what he was going to do with his time. He kept his barn and his house and decided to make a bargain barn. And that's gone quite well for him, by the way. All right, the next thing will be queries and reports. So once we've built the database and put some tables in there with some data, then we can start making these reports. So this is called functional analysis, where we've worked out the functions that the database needs to perform to help the business. So there'll be a whole separate lesson all about queries, and that's when you get subsets of data out of your database. The first one we'll need is a seller's contact list, so we can contact people, obviously, when their items are older than 30 days. We need to know what the current items for sale are, so that's going to be another query. And finding out items that are older than 30 days will need to be a query so that we can then contact those people that we're trying to sell them and tell them to come down and collect them. We'll need a items needing collection by sellers, which is what we were just talking about basically. So we've sort of detailed some things there about what needs to happen in the business process when items need to be collected by sellers. Then if an item doesn't get collected, then it becomes 37 days old since it first went into the barn, and those items are identified using a query and a report so that those ones can be collected up and dropped off at charity organizations. We also want a couple of other reports just for marketing purposes and for business to see how the money side of things going. So we've got the items for sale for more than $100. They're important because they're the ones we need to target selling because they'll earn the most commission. And finally, we have a report here which just gives us some total sales and commission figures so we can see kind of week by week, month by month, how the business is currently performing. Okay, now after we've done queries and got all that information, the next learning module will be to do screen forms. And first up, we'll do basic screen forms. And the ones we need are a customer details form, where we can use this to add on a new customer when they show up at the barn with their goods for sale, and also look up contact information and bank account information for customers. The next form will be for the items currently available in the barn. And here we're actually joining together our two tables. So we've got the seller's table over here on the right. And once we enter the seller ID, this information automatically appears through the relational access property, and we'll be talking about that in the forms lesson. And these are the main key things we need to know about the stock item. And then in a separate lesson, we'll look at how we can put images on the form of each of the items. We need a sold items form so that we can work out the ones that are sold. And with the query, we've already calculated the commission and the balance that has to be paid to them, and we can process the sale and do that on this form. The other form will be for the uncollected items, so they need their own form to process them, and we've detailed that, the detailed requirements here. So by specifying these detailed requirements, we can work out when it's time to build the forms. We know what has to be put on them because we understand what the form is going to be used for and how the form is going to help create the business functions. Finally, there's the buyer details form for those buyers that were prepared to leave their information for marketing purposes. Okay, other items and features. After we've finished building this test database, we're going to add on a main menu system so that it's just a pick and click. So you'll have the main kind of dashboard or menu screen. Access calls it a switchboard, but basically you can click anywhere on that to go to any particular form you want to go to, any particular query or report that you need to run. So that's kind of like the main control center of the database, and we build that at the end. Now, you may have already spotted in this design there are a couple of little problems which are going to crop up while we're doing the processing. But Access is very flexible and we can fix them later on. So we work off the 80-20 rule. This design now is at least 80% correct and we can start building. And then later on, Access has the flexibility that it's easy to make changes and fix little things up as we go. And we'll have a whole separate training lesson where we do all those fixes that need to be done. So just to recap, it's important to understand this business because just like a builder has looked at the plan of the house and has got sort of a picture of how the whole thing needs to look, even when they're doing individual items like just working on the kitchen or just working on the bathroom, we need to have kind of this big picture while we're building all of our different items in the database. So there's a summary there. That's kind of the main point forms of how this business works and the things we are going to build to support this business. Okay, so where to next? Having done the case study, we'll be straight into a lesson on creating the database and the tables. Then we'll have another learning module to do all of our queries. For forms, we're going to have a few different modules that build on each other. So first we'll make the basic forms, then we'll add some drop-down lists to them, and then we'll get the stock item pictures showing. But that's kind of a bit of a job, so we're going to split that up over like 3 or 4 different learning modules. Then we can create input data validation. Okay, it's important that things are typed in properly and we try and catch errors as they're being entered. We don't want something being typed in and someone just kind of like, you know, bumping the keyboard or falling asleep or something and it ends up costing $2 million. That's not going to work too well when we crunch business figures and run reports. And as we discussed, there will need to be reports run daily, and that will be a separate lesson on how to do that. And then at the very end, we build the main switchboard menu, the main control panel for the database system. So thanks for watching. Thanks for being part of this learning course. And we look forward to seeing you again in the database tables build lesson.